Without further ado, I'd like to invite Katie to come up to talk about the work at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Northern Westchester.
Hi, I'm Katie Alberte from the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship of Northern Westchester, and I'm here to talk about the process we went through to erect a Black Lives banner at our congregation, and then some other things that happened as a result of that. When I was in Paula Cole-Jones' session this morning about why is it so hard to get people involved in anti-racism work in your congregation, I was sort of startled to see what a contentious issue it had been for congregations to put up a Black Lives Matter banner. And I think it could have gone that way in our congregation, but we were lucky enough to have a process that helped pull us together instead of tear us apart. And I want to give you a little bit of background about the congregation. We are a congregation that's been between about 110 and 130 people as long as I've been there, which is 28 years. And there was a very strong story that the congregation told itself. It told itself, we can't get involved in political or controversial issues. And it was because once upon a time we did, and we blew up. At the end of the 60s, the early 70s, we had a minister who took a very strong stance against the Vietnam War. In fact, he went to the IBM shareholders meeting and stood up and berated this was a story, berated the chairman of IBM, and most of the men in the congregation worked at IBM. So the Board of Trustees did not find that very amusing, and he parted company. The congregation, shortly thereafter, went from about 300 people to 20 in a couple of years. There were a lot of other reasons, but the myth and the story, the belief in the congregation was that we can't have controversy and we can't get involved in social justice anymore. This is it. And when I joined in 1992, that was the story, and I had come from an activist congregation in Houston, Texas, and it seemed really weird, but these were nice people and they all liked each other, so it was working. Our building's tucked away in the woods in Bedford, New York, which is the home of Ralph Lauren and Martha Stewart. They don't belong, we don't get their use of their money. But on the border with Mount Kisco, New York, which is majority Latino, and in fact, the Bedford Central School District is busily trying people in the Bedford Central School District are busily trying to find a way to keep Mount Kisco out of their district, even though they're in it. And then to our north is Bedford Hills, which is a middle-class, has some middle-class Black communities, but we're in a white bubble, to put it bluntly. The congregation survived, like I said, it survived and it grew. And when Michael Tino, our current minister, came to candidate, he started talking about the J word, justice work. And we were kind of taken aback, and we sort of looked around at each other during the candidating sermon, but he is great, so we kind of said, okay, we can deal with that. And he ratcheted up and added a little bit more to the conversation over time. Then in 2015, I'm sorry, I'm old. 2015, Michael came back from General Assembly asking us to fulfill the resolution that was passed at General Assembly to support the Black Lives Matter movement and to start a prophetic witness against racism. We had come to trust his judgment. I was not on the board at that point, but he went to the board and said, I want to hang this banner, and the board said, sure, Michael, go for it. And I heard today that other congregations went through that same process. And it could have gone the same way it did in other congregations, but he left the board meeting and thought about it, and he thought, if I do this, we will have a banner out there, and everybody inside the congregation will be exactly in the same place they were when we hung the banner. So he came back to the board and said, I'm going to hold off on this until we work through this together as a congregation, and that this has to be validated by a vote at a formal congregational meeting. So he structured a whole series of discussions, workshops, and back that up with putting something in the newsletter every week, linking to an article. Some of the topics we addressed, we read, as a congregation, we read Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me. He introduced the idea of my brain just went blank on it, the law of discovery. Doctrine of discovery, which divided the world into two separate spheres for the good Christian people, and everybody else could be your slave, and that's fine. And it still has a legal effect. I did not know this till I learned it in church. So this took 6 months, and we were a congregation, like I said, that really didn't get into this sort of stuff, but I think a couple things were happening. One is that we had a goal. Like I said, he hung this banner up in the worship room and said, we can't put this outside till we're ready to do it. So we had a goal. And the other thing is, at that particular time, the activism of the Black Lives Matter movement was making this a very vivid, was putting vivid representations of the injustice in our society on television every night. So it was in our face. So we had 35, 40 people at the discussion of Between the World and Me. We had regular potluck lunches to discuss these issues, and it did two things. And I'm going to say this in a selfish way. It not only raised our consciousness, it brought us together as a community around something really important. And we had discussions. We learned things about each other. For instance, one of my really good friends, who is, obviously white, but although she's half Indian, her grandsons are of mixed race. Her son-in-law is Haitian. He plays the bassoon and the English horn in the New York Philharmonic Orchestra, and he's regularly hassled on the street. I didn't know that. So sharing these personal stories really made this real for us. So then we came to the hard part, which was to take this to the actual congregational meeting and have a vote. We've had congregational meetings before where somebody says, I don't like that, and it shuts everything down. But generally, those were meetings where we hadn't thought this through as a congregation. In this case, we owned it together. So after 6 months of study, preparation, discussion, we had a congregational meeting, and normally we have a quorum of 25. Normally, we're like dragging people off the streets to get to that quorum. We had 50 people at the meeting. There was one abstention and a few questions, not about the Black Lives Matter banner, but about the actual resolution that had been passed at GA, which included things like abolishing I'm paraphrasing, abolishing elements of the criminal justice system. There was a little bit of, we're not quite there yet. One person abstained. Other than that, it was unanimous. So we hung the banner, and we were very happy. What's the result of that? Well, we've had 10 banners. They get stolen or slashed on a regular basis. We keep putting them back up. We had angry white, honest to God, angry white couples bang on the door and disturb our bilingual kindergarten director, demanding a white person come to the door and go take the flag down. These people went to the police, and the police said, I'm sorry, it's their church. They can put this banner up if they want to. That was like a real exemplar of white privilege. And I personally, at that point, I was the president of the congregation, picking up answering machine calls, and I called one person back who'd left a message, oh, I saw your banner, I'm so happy. And I called her back, she said, this is terrible, you have to take it down. So they weren't thrilled. On the other hand, we're on a very busy road, and Michael Tino, our minister, has been approached by many, many people who say, I'm a person of color, and it means so much to me to see that banner up there and to see that we are supported by this congregation, and it gives me strength. And we've had more people of color come to visit the church. We may not be quite there yet in terms of being an open enough congregation so that everybody feels comfortable, but people feel comfortable coming in and visiting, and we've had a couple of new African American members. So it was a process that isn't perfect. We're not totally there yet. We'll never be, but it really was worthwhile. Thank you.